Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to join today's webinar. We are very excited to announce the Kresge Foundation funding opportunity for Memphis. My name is Jade Smith, and I am the Special Assistant to the President. I am joined by program officers from across the foundation who you will hear from shortly. During the presentation, we will touch on an overview of the Kresge Foundation, Kresge's engagement to date with organizations in Memphis, a description of what the funding opportunity for Memphis is, the type of work that we're likely to fund. We'll also go over elements of a strong application, review the process and the timeline, quickly go over how to apply, and then lastly we'll jump into Q&A. Now I'll hand it over to my colleague Chris.
Thank you, Jade, and many thanks to everyone who's joining us on this webinar. My name is Chris Cable, and I serve as Deputy Director of the Health Program at Kresge. For those of you who are not yet familiar with the Kresge Foundation, I wanted to provide some quick background about who we are and what we do. Kresge is a national private foundation based in Metro Detroit that works to expand opportunity for people with low incomes in America's cities. Kresge has an endowment of $3.6 billion, and last year we awarded approximately $145 million in grants and social investments. Kresge manages 6 programs: arts and culture, education, environment, health, human services, and Detroit, which is our largest program. We also operate 2 cross-cutting practices, our American Cities practice and our robust social investment practice. It's important to note that Kresge is not a stranger to Memphis. Since 2013, we've made more than $2.5 million in grants and social investments in the city on topics ranging from community development to college access and success. Kresge is also one of the national funding partners behind Reimagining the Civic Commons, a $40 million initiative that selected Memphis as one of its 4 cities in September. While we're proud of the investments we've made in Memphis over the past several years, we also realize that there are a number of potential partners in the city that have not yet had the opportunity to share their missions, programs, or aspirations with us. In order to open the door to a wider range of initiatives, we've opened an application portal for organizations that are working to expand opportunities for Memphis residents with low incomes. This is the first time that Kresge has created a place-specific funding opportunity for any city outside of our hometown of Detroit. We're inviting proposals from nonprofit organizations and local government agencies that are based in Memphis or that have an operational track record in the city. We are not able to fund primary or secondary schools, for-profit organizations, or individuals. We'll consider proposals that request funding both for planning activities as well as full implementation of established strategies. We'll also consider requests for operating funding in select cases for creative placemaking, community development, and human services. Grants can range for up to 2 years, and we expect most grants to be in the range of $25,000 to $150,000. And at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Chantel Rush, a program officer with our American Cities practice.
Hello. I make investments in community development and lead Kresge's work in Memphis at Kresge headquarters, ensuring that we're up to date on what's happening in your city, but also ensuring that we're bringing the breadth of our resources to Memphis. I work closely with Carol Coletta, a fellow in our American Cities practice, who lives in Memphis and is our connection on the ground. I'd like to provide some more detail on what types of grants Kresge is hoping to make through this funding opportunity. Kresge has expertise in the areas of community development, creative placemaking, higher education, health, and human services. As we have program officers working in each of these fields, we are most likely to fund in each of these areas. And even better, though it's not a requirement, we like to make grants that cut across these different sectors and disciplines. For example, projects that might utilize creative placemaking to develop a community to improve health outcomes, or really any project where organizations from different sectors or disciplines might be working together to solve a complicated community challenge. Now, the fields of creative placemaking, community development, education, health, and human services are quite broad, and so we wanted to provide a little bit more information about what we might be most likely to support within each of these areas. There are 4 areas highlighted on the slide, and we'll spend some of the time in the next few slides and the next few pages talking about what within each of these areas we might be willing to support. The first is supporting articulation of community priorities. The second, determining plans for action. The third, enhancing the capacity for transformative change. And fourth, strengthening neighborhoods and systems of opportunity in the city. Within supporting the articulation of community priorities, Kresge has a somewhat unique point of view. We believe that when it comes to solving entrenched and systematic challenges in cities, it pays to be somewhat strategic and really know where to start across a myriad of issues. So we'd like to support both defining community priorities in Memphis and also collecting the information that is needed to inform decision making. This could mean, first, identifying key barriers to social or economic mobility, whether that's through research, data collection, or analysis and compilation, or it could mean getting together and supporting convenings to help to establish a shared and evidence-based understanding of community objectives and challenges. Now, sometimes it's not about social and economic opportunities broadly, but there are also specific issues where it might be helpful to have additional pieces of information or data to make decisions. So, for example, in the areas of blight or land use or health and human service provision, we'd like to make sure that we're also supporting the collection of critical missing data that's needed to establish priorities and convenings to help establish a shared understanding of these challenges. I want to note here that Kresge doesn't just consider quantitative data or research. We also believe that collecting the opinions of residents and community members is important during this type of work. On the next slide, in strengthening communities, we find that even when priorities are clear or data is available, it could be helpful to take some time to determine clear plans for action. So we'd like to support and are likely to support convenings to help establish shared agendas across community organizations and funders on key community issues, especially the kind of issues that really need different organizations to work together to solve a challenge. And we'd also like to support the creation of ambitious and community-informed plans for acting on priorities. This could mean a plan for a community organization in a community to solve a neighborhood issue, but it also could mean a plan for a collective table, existing or new, to solve a citywide issue like land use or racial inequalities. So I talked a little bit about data and priorities and plans, but we also want to support some of the capacity of actually executing this, and Chris will talk about that.
Sure. Thanks, Chantel. So under the category of enhancing capacity for transformative change, we're looking to support organizations that are working to form or strengthen multi-sector collaborations or supporting efforts to integrate across disciplines in ways that deliver outcomes for communities with low income. We're also looking to form or strengthen collaborations between healthcare, public health, and community partners in ways that promote health equity and reduce healthcare costs. Also, we're looking to strengthen community investment system by building a capacity of key financial intermediaries and borrowers involved in neighborhood revitalization, or by developing plans and studies that identify investable opportunities aligned with community priorities in neighborhoods. We're also looking to improve the effectiveness of community development approaches that bring regional and national experts to speak, present, train, or consult in Memphis, or by supporting local practitioners by traveling to other cities, to attending conferences or trainings, to connect to national networks, best practices, innovative leaders, and thought leadership so they can bring that expertise back to Memphis. Under strengthening neighborhoods and systems of opportunity, within the health program, we're interested in developing healthy built environments. It can be done through housing and neighborhoods, through land use and transportation initiatives, essentially recognizing that the context of our neighborhoods shapes opportunities for health. So within this priority, we fund a lot of community organizing and advocacy to ensure that local policies actually result in environments that promote health, particularly for low-income residents. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Sandy Ambrosi with our Human Services team to talk more about our resilient human services ecosystem work.
Hi, this is Sandy Ambrosi. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the Human Services team. We're interested in supporting a resilient human service ecosystem with effective policies and practices that are person-centered, outcome-oriented, integrated, and holistic. We hope as a result of this work that stronger systems will be in place to reset the odds so people with low incomes have more choices and chances in their lives. And now I'll turn it over to Caroline to talk about the education program.
Hello, this is Caroline Altman-Smith. I'm the Deputy Director of Kresge's Education Program.
We have three main areas within our education work, which is overall focused on increasing post-secondary access and success for low-income and students of color and other disadvantaged student groups. We have three main strategies within this work. The first is about creating clear pathways to and through college. The second is about increasing the institutional capacity of colleges that serve the student populations we're most passionate about. Those would include colleges like community colleges as well as minority-serving institutions. And then the third is increasing coordination and collaboration of partners, such as higher education, K through 12, city government, nonprofits, or business, around post-secondary access and success issues. For shorthand, we often refer to this as our urban higher education ecosystem strategy. And if you're interested, you can find more information about this strategy, including a useful video and infographic on our website. Now I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Hello, my name is Michelle Johnson, Program Officer with the National Arts and Culture team. Our work is focused on creative placemaking, which is an approach to comprehensive community development and urban planning practices that deliberately embeds arts, culture, and community-engaged design. A shortcoming of comprehensive community development and urban planning solutions is that they often lack authentic resident engagement, creativity, and imagination. We believe that more insightful and creative approaches to comprehensive community development and urban planning are required to realize their full potential. Arts, culture, and community-engaged design as part of a suite of solutions can influence the built environment, enhance residents' engagement and agency, and contribute to the narrative of place. The win is for arts, culture, and community-engaged design, which we're calling creative placemaking, to be on equal terms with and as central as transportation, housing, and land use are to comprehensive community development and urban planning approaches. Now I'll turn it over to Chantel.
Hello. So for my community development perch, the American Cities practice is interested in supporting neighborhood-level community development initiatives that improved conditions in distressed core city neighborhoods. At Kresge, we believe that vibrant, mixed-income neighborhoods which connect low-income residents to education, jobs, and opportunity and healthcare can really provide the leg up that low-income residents may need to succeed. So we'd like to see your plans to use new and innovative approaches to revitalize or strengthen your neighborhoods, and also to see your plans for using kind of tried and true effective plans that can make a bigger difference in neighborhoods today. We especially like to think of revitalization from an asset-based and community-oriented lens, and we're open to your largest and best ideas. Now that we've gone through some of the types of projects we're more likely to fund, we also wanted to share the characteristics of a particularly strong application. Strong letters of inquiry to Kresge would include a few different characteristics. The first is that they would focus on expanding opportunities for Memphis residents with low income. Kresge is primarily focused on serving people with low income throughout American cities, and so we would hope the primary population served or affected by the work proposed in your proposal would be low income residents. Secondly, we would love to see an emphasis on improving racial equity. We think of racial equity as reducing disparities across incomes and health outcomes and college attainment and other factors. And we prefer to really fund organizations that either in their work seek to tackle these inequities, or also in their boardrooms and in their organizations have a staff and a strategic plan that are really reflective of including people of all races and ethnicities. We're really more likely to support projects that provide minority and disadvantaged races and ethnicities with equal access to the supports provided through the programs. We'd like to see a clear articulation of goals and strategies, as well as collaboration with local partners. We find that in community development work, it's very hard to go it alone, so we appreciate work that draws on the expertise of other organizations where they're the experts in a sector or discipline. And we also look to see an orientation towards learning and continuous improvement. We seek to really fund organizations that have a clear eye on the outcomes that they're trying to affect and might adjust their work and learn from their challenges as they tackle their projects. As I mentioned earlier, we're probably more likely to make investments that are multidisciplinary in approach and draw on the expertise of 2 or more of our program teams, although that's not a requirement. And we also look to make investments that have the potential to unlock additional funding from other funders nationally or in Memphis, and projects that leverage existing investments from other funders. So this could look like a few different things. First, it could be that if Kresge invests in a project is likely to be able to raise additional funding from other funders in the future. Or it could mean that other funders will commit or have committed to match Kresge funding. Or lastly, it could mean that there is an existing investor in a project or an organization, and our dollars will really support building on and expanding upon the existing work. But either way, we're interested in supporting organizations and projects that really represent sustainability and could be carried on long after Kresge is able to be involved. We also want to share a bit about the process and for applying and the timeline, and so I'll turn it back over to Jade Smith to discuss those details. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantel, and thank you to our program officers for explaining the type of work that we're likely to fund. I'll briefly review the application process and timeline, as well as go over how to apply. The selection process will be divided into 2 phases. The first phase involves submitting a letter of inquiry of up to 4 pages. There are 6 questions that you'll have to answer, and 1 optional question if you're seeking social investments. You can find these questions on the Kresge website or in our grants management system, which I'll go over in a bit. Letters of inquiry are due Tuesday, January 31st, 2017. After internal review, we will invite selected applicants to submit full proposals by Friday, March 24th of 2017. Full proposals will entail questions that are tailored to your organization's application. Applicants will then have a month until Monday, April 24th to complete full proposals. We'll review the full proposals that we receive internally and notify final grantees by June 12th. To apply to the funding opportunity, you will use our grants management system called Flux. If you are a new applicant to Kresge through the Flux system, you will have to register for an account. This is not an automated process, so it's important to note that you should register at least 2 weeks before the letter of inquiry deadline, as it takes several days to process. Once you've created your account and log in, you'll select grant opportunities on the left side panel, and you'll see 2 options. You want to choose the second one that says Start a New Grant RFP. We've created a detailed Flux user manual that's tailored to this funding opportunity. So please refer to that document as you use the system. You'll be able to find that document on our website as well. If you have further questions on how to use Flux, please don't hesitate to reach out to our grants management team at grantsmanagement@kresge.org. That concludes our presentation. We'll now transition into Q&A. I'll hand it over to Chris, who will moderate our Q&A session.
Sure. So the first question that has come in regards the grant range. It said, can you review the request amount and grant range again? So we anticipate that these grants will range between $25,000 and $150,000, and grant in terms of the terms of the grant, the duration can last for up to 2 years. And there also just received a question regarding our grants only, do we intend grants only to go to nonprofit organizations? We can entertain proposals both from nonprofit organizations as well as local government agencies. And so this question about can you talk more about how you're using interdisciplinary work for these purposes? You know, as we covered earlier in the webinar, and again, apologies for the audio difficulties. You know, Kresge does have 6 different programs, as well as 2 cross-cutting practices, and increasingly we're looking for ways to bring the various expertise and resources that we have at Kresge to full use for communities in ways that support their aspirations for revitalization. So if you have an initiative that involves partners representing multiple sectors, we definitely want to hear from you. We want to hear how these sectors and disciplines are being interwoven in ways that support community aspirations. So there's a question about operating support. So particularly, is there an amount of grant that can be used for operating support? I saw this briefly, but couldn't hear you. Again, apologies for the mangled audio earlier in the webinar. We will be considering proposals for operating support within human services, community development, and creative placemaking. In other programs, we can fund both planning and implementation activities.
With general operating support, we do look at the existing organization or work underway, that there's evidence that it's extremely effective and that it's being carried out in a way that's outcomes oriented, and that there's some proof that there would be the demand for, if the organization were to have more general operating support or capacity, that money would be put to use, and that additional services are needed by the community.
Great, thank you. So thank you for all the questions. They're coming fast and furious now, and doing our best to keep on top of them. So there was a question regarding, will grants heavily focused on early intervention, childhood education, or disabilities be considered? You know, we are sort of fairly agnostic when it comes to specific topics like this. I'd say that so long as your proposal fulfills the other considerations that we've listed in the webinar, we would consider it. There's also a question regarding the role of fiscal agents. Can organizations apply through fiscal agents? And the answer is yes. We've certainly done that in the past. If there's either an initiative that is not formally incorporated itself as a 501c3, but you work through a fiscal sponsor, we certainly would consider those proposals. So questions about both the total size of the grant pool available as well as how many grants we intend to make. I need to acknowledge that this is a new practice for Kresge. Right? Outside of the city of Detroit, we've never had sort of a city-specific funding opportunity. So we are learning alongside you. In that respect, we don't know yet how many grants we're going to award. We don't know yet the total dollar amount that those grants will represent. What we're trying to do is open the door much wider than it has ever been opened for new partners in the city of Memphis. Since this is a completely new sort of practice for us, we don't yet know what the result is going to be. We just hope you'll work with us and trust us as we get to a good outcome. So So again, we're trying to catch up with as many of your incoming questions as possible. What?
There's a question coming in about what is racial equity and what does it mean to Kresge. I want to first acknowledge that this is a very challenging topic, and there's no one very clear definition of what racial equity could mean. And in fact, we're probably more interested in understanding how Memphis views what racial equity means and what your organization would consider would be racial equity in Memphis. But I will say two things. The first is that we know that there are a lot of racial disparities in the experience of Americans and cities. And so we do look and appreciate projects that are working to improve these racial disparities and decrease them in cities. And we also would, we look for projects where, regardless of race, you do have access, a resident would have access to the services that are provided. And perhaps that not only the project or the work, but also the organization carrying out the work would seek to act in a manner of accordance with what the city looks like and who its residents are. We're also getting a question, why has Kresge selected Memphis as a priority city? Thanks for this question. So for the last decade, Kresge has been investing in our hometown of Detroit very heavily and strategically, and we've made investments in everything from community development to the early childhood systems. We've had some early success successes in Detroit. And we wanted to understand as a foundation whether there was anything in our expertise from Detroit that could be applied to other cities. When we were looking at other cities, a thing that came, we noticed that there were a lot of things in common between Detroit and Memphis. Some of those are geographical. You know, we both have beautiful rivers and riverfronts and different corridors and neighborhoods. But there are also other things we have in common. So the first is that there's a high level of need. Both Memphis and Detroit have high levels of poverty and lower levels of social and economic mobility. But we also see Memphis as having tremendous assets, which really could be brought to bear on these challenges of social and economic opportunity. So we look at the nonprofits in Memphis, the community of Memphis, the strong city government, and we think that there is a potential to use these wonderful assets and to bear them on these challenges and opportunities. There are also some very tactical similarities between Memphis and Detroit, challenges of land use and blight that come from being a large city, and also challenges of racial inequity because both are, of course, majority-minority cities. So we feel a similarity between our work in Memphis and Detroit, but we also look at Memphis as having a lot of opportunities for each of our different experts and program teams to bear upon.
Thanks, Chantel. So we have a couple questions with regards to eligible expenses or types of projects. So one person asked if we would fund endowments, another asked if we would fund capital expenditures. And the answer to both is no. For those who are familiar with Kresge, you might know that for our first 82 years, all we did was we funded capital construction projects, and that's why you'll see Kresge's name on a lot of buildings around the country. About 9 years ago, we kind of turned that corner and became more of a strategic philanthropy, so we do not make capital construction grants anymore, and we do not fund endowments. Another question about could we restate Kresge's 6 programs and 2 practices, since again the audio was sort of garbled earlier. So again, our 6 programs are arts and culture, education, environment, health, human services, and Detroit. And our 2 cross-cutting practices are our social investment practice and our American cities practice.
There was a question came in about how we're defining Memphis geographically. We are defining Memphis as the city of Memphis, and we're particularly interested in working in low-income or distressed neighborhoods in Memphis. But that being said, we understand that there are certain systems that affect the lives of people with low income that are not confined to city limits. For instance, in some cities we find that health or human services systems expand across counties or regions. So if you have a proposal that has a strong impact on people with low income in the city of Memphis, but perhaps draws a little bit more broadly because it has to because of the system it's working on, we would welcome that proposal as well.
This is Michelle Johnson, Program Officer of the Arts and Culture Program here at the Kresge Foundation, and the question was asked about defining creative placemaking and give examples of successful projects. So the definition is really the integration of arts, culture, and community-engaged design as part of a comprehensive approach to community development and urban planning approaches. And to give you some examples, with this RFP, we're looking at neighborhood as well as municipal system level work. And so in the municipal system space, we worked with a local organization in Minneapolis who partnered with the city where they deployed 5 artists within several city agencies to look at community development efforts among several neighborhoods that they were focused in. And this allowed the city and the local arts organization to work collaboratively together, using artists, bringing their practices and their products to come to bear on some of the challenging issues facing neighborhoods within that particular city. We have numerous other examples related to neighborhood-based work, but because of time, I won't take up all of the airtime describing the different products, but you can look at our website, on our webpage at kresge.org. We have many examples from different grants that we've done across our local systems as well as our place-based initiative work.
We received a question whether there is anyone that we can receive technical assistance from or a specific contact in Michigan. We've created an email inbox, memphis@kresge.org, which is monitored by Jade Smith, Special Assistant to the President, and also myself. We will look at any requests for technical assistance with LOIs or the application through that inbox and send it to the appropriate program officer. We will do our best to respond in a timely manner. We're often quite busy, so if you send something to memphis@kresge.org, we will get back to you, and we would appreciate your patience.
There were a couple questions about the LOI and RFP dates. I apologize again that you couldn't hear that during the presentation, but I've put the slide up again. So it's a two-step process. The first step is submitting a letter of inquiry, and that's due January 31st. And then we will invite selected applicants to submit a full proposal by March 24th. And then we'll give organizations a month to complete the proposal, and that is due April 24th. And we intend to make a list of final grantees by June 12th. Then I think someone also asked about the time frame of the grants that we are giving, and the grants will be considered for a time frame of up to 2 years.
And there was also a question that came in regarding the timeline. And again, sorry if the audio is garbled earlier. We do plan to make this grant awards by early to mid-June. And as Jay just mentioned, the grant duration can last for up to 2 years. Also received a question about, can a new organization apply for grants, or do you have to be an established organization with a proven track record? We would certainly consider proposals from newer organizations. Obviously, we would expect you to have already received your 501c3 status. So not new in terms of you just developed the idea for the organization last week. But we especially since these are relatively small grants for Kresge, that we would consider newer organizations. We would just want to know all the things that we've already articulated earlier in the webinar with regards to what you plan to do, how they align with Kresge strategies, etc. Also received a question regarding another question about eligibility. Would we consider funding 501c4s in addition to 501c3s? Kresge does not have a robust history of funding 501c4s. I'm not sure if we have an outright prohibition against doing so, but I'd say 501c3s and local government agencies would be the most likely partners to engage through this funding opportunity.
We received a question asking whether proposal details will be treated as confidential information. Yes. If you send in a proposal to us, we will discuss it among our team here at Kresge internally, but we, of course, would not share the details of the proposal with other organizations outside of Kresge.
So we received a really good question that I'll let Chantel answer, but it regards Kresge's longer-term vision and aspirations in Memphis. Obviously, this is one funding opportunity. It's not the only thing we have done or will do in the city of Memphis, but since Chantel's with our American Cities practice, she's probably most qualified to answer that.
Yeah, so yes, we do have a vision and a hope to make larger grants over the longer term in Memphis. We actually have made larger grants than what we are opening this funding opportunity to in the past. We're making a large investment in reimagining the Civic Commons as the Fourth Bluff project, and we've also made larger investments in intermediaries such as Community Lift and Hope Credit Union. So we'll continue to do that. This funding opportunity, we were trying to think of the way we could reach the most organizations possible and be most accessible with our funding. So we are starting with smaller and shorter-term grants, but we will hope over time to build the relationships in which we can make larger grants. Our primary interest is in doing the most we can for people with low income in Memphis, and we want to work in the way that makes that most possible.
So we've received a number of questions that are very specific to different types of programs, including programs for homeless veterans or workforce development or animal cruelty. And we don't have a priority that gets down to that sort of granular level in terms of that type of population. Again, I'd refer folks back to the overarching goals that we have for this funding opportunity. In terms of like a specific project related to a specific organization, those types of questions are probably best addressed through the memphis@kresge.org email address. And we'll do our best during the Q&A portion of this webinar to focus on answer questions that have sort of broader relevance to everybody who's participating. Great. So I have another question sort of regarding eligibility. If an organization receives a grant from Kresge, do they have to wait until that grant is completed before applying again? Kresge does not establish and have a prohibition on organizations being funded more than once, either from multiple different programs or within the same program. So if you are a current grantee of Kresge, you are not precluded from applying for this funding opportunity. And if you earn a grant through this funding opportunity, you are not precluded from applying for a future funding opportunity as well.
I just want to add one comment in about the C4 question. Although we don't typically fund C4s, we do fund advocacy efforts from C3 organizations, and we consider that an important part of our work. And so of course, as long as depending on the amount of advocacy, et cetera, we don't support direct lobbying, of course. But I just wanted to point that out, that advocacy is an important part of our work in many of our programs.
Thank you.
There was also a question about workforce development and possible examples. And as again, this is the Human Service Program. As Chris mentioned, we are issue agnostic, but it's very important that you meet what we call the criteria for competitiveness around being integrated and holistic and person-centered. So if your work has the aim of helping someone find employment, we will be looking at your approaches and your practices and want to see that it is, again, integrated and holistic, because we think that approach provides the most enduring outcomes in supporting a person's journey towards economic mainstream.
So we received a question requesting an example of a successful project that Kresge has funded in the past that falls within the grant range for this funding opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, this is a new practice for Kresge about opening a funding opportunity specifically within one city. So we're kind of breaking new ground here. We realize that the funding that is available on a grant-by-grant basis is fairly modest, but we hope that that concurrently it adds up, it aggregates to something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. We do, my colleague Sandy with the Human Services team looks like it's that she has an example that she'd like to share.
I mean, this is certainly not going to replace any significant funding that you might have, nor should it be considered something for the long term. But if you're a human serving organization and you wish to take a deeper dive in looking at outcomes or data of some kind, or you want to start thinking about your role in the community as a backbone or as an organizer, that can provide the salary for a person. It can contract for some resources to do some deeper dive in your data to ensure that you're getting the outcomes that you are hoping for. So again, this is meant to be in part sort of catalytic investment and an investment that is needed now to let you pivot, possibly scale, or possibly expand something. But again, it's not going to plug some major holes in your revenue support.
One example I would provide too of some smaller grants that we've made around the country and in Detroit that are small amounts but have been particularly catalytic are travel grants. So we've supported actually a group of folks from organizations in Memphis to go see examples of their work in other cities, and then convening back in Memphis to discuss the issues and how they might change their approach or edit their approach going forward. We've also supported national experts coming to Memphis just to share their ideas with the community to consult on projects. So again, as Sandy says, not necessarily a budget plug, but an opportunity perhaps to support planning, to support improving or building upon the ideas that are available in the sector.
This is Stacy Barbas again from the health team. I'd also like to offer another example of a project that we funded in Memphis from Binghamton Development Corporation. We have an initiative called the Fresh, Local, and Equitable, or Fresh Low Initiative, which really is a way to use food as a platform for creative revitalization of cities. And Binghamton is one of our 26 grantees around the country. We're very excited that they had such a strong proposal, and we're working with them. And these are $75,000 planning grants that will then be an opportunity to turn into an implementation grant down the road next year.
Hi, this is Bethany Miller, Program Officer on the Education team, and I have a question here about sort of permissible partnership that we would be interested in funding. And so I just wanted to reiterate, because the audio was garbled at the beginning, our team's mission is really increasing post-secondary access and success of low-income, minority, and otherwise disadvantaged student groups. So we're really interested in any partnership that may advance that mission. So we are open to partnerships between nonprofits and school systems as long as they're oriented to post-secondary access and success. That said, we have not traditionally been a funder of K-12 players, so I think we would probably want to see the nonprofit partner in the driver's seat or in equal partnership with the school district.
So this is Chris Cable again with the health team. I just wanted to acknowledge that we've been joined by Kimberly Cornett, who directs our social investment practice at Kresge. So we're also open to questions that have to do with the role of social investments and revitalization in Memphis. Well, looks like the questions are starting to taper off a bit. So if I know we're scheduled till 5 o'clock. It's 4:51. Also acknowledge that we did have some audio challenges earlier in the webinar. So if folks do have any questions that they'd like to squeeze in before the end of the webinar, please do so. Please also know that this is not your last chance to ask questions. We do have the memphis@kresge.org account set up specifically for that purpose. So we do have a question about social investment, which I'll turn over to Kimberly. The question is, what sort of things can be funded via social investment? Is this the same funding limit as grants? So that, yeah, again, the grant range for Memphis for this funding opportunity is $25,000 to $150,000. Social investment typically works at a larger scale, but I'll turn it over to Kimberly.
The social investments that Kresge makes typically, can range from $1 million on up. So they do exceed the grant size that's targeted for this program. We're in the business of making loans, equity investments, guarantees, and deposits with institutions and in institutions who have a program that ties to one of our program priorities. So if you have reviewed the application, you saw that really the first screen for a social investment is really to make sure that we have a tight linkage with the program priorities that my colleagues have been discussing today. If you do have a need for a loan, equity investment, guarantee, or deposit, we're open to hearing about that in your application. And if there's a strong enough programmatic fit and we feel like it's a good match for our investment appetite, we'll be back in touch to request some additional information.
And to clarify, everyone who fills out an LOI application will receive a question asking them whether or not they feel that they also have a need for social investment capital. We received a question, if someone is awarded a grant, would they receive a lump sum or a series of installments? This depends on the grant. Once your LOI and your requested budget are received by a program officer, they'll determine the right payment structure for the grant. Sometimes we do make a grant as a lump grant. Sometimes we do make it over time depending on the cash flow needs of the organization or the project.
There's a question about sharing the link for the LOI application. There is information on this funding opportunity on our website, kresge.org, but I will also send out further details in an email to all of the participants of this call with the direct link to our System Flex, where you will be able to find the application for this letter of inquiry process.
In the meantime, this is Michelle Johnson. I would just reiterate that, again, if you're looking for examples that are related to any of the programs, please visit our website. We have our annual report available that gives descriptions of grants that we have done in our different areas. But also, if you click on each web page of each program, they have highlighted significant grants that they're looking at, or not looking at, excuse me, but have funded. That could be also an opportunity for you to review what we are currently doing.
In addition, because our American Cities webpage is in a different area on the webpage, I would refer you to the funding opportunity materials, which Jade will send out, which do have detail, as we walked through earlier when it was garbled, so sorry, about some of the things that we do fund from a more broad community development perspective, which may be, a combination of our programs as you see on kresge.org or more granular as well.
So we received a question regarding our intention to help leverage local funding, and specifically asking if Kresge would sort of make our grant contingent upon demonstration of securing local funding, or if it's sufficient for an organization to demonstrate sort of a capacity and intention to pursue local funding. And the answer is in the second category. We would not make an award and then hold it until you receive any sort of match. What we're hoping to do is to demonstrate that there is some degree of local support for your project or initiative, and to grow the pool of resources to help you fulfill your aspirations. I have a question regarding evaluation. Specifically, is grant program evaluation administered by Kresge, or should this be included in a proposal? Again, this is a new practice for Kresge in terms of creating a funding opportunity specifically for a city that is not Detroit. We do not, at this point, plan to contract with a third-party evaluator to evaluate this cohort of grants that we'll be making through this funding opportunity. We are always interested in grantees' plans to evaluate the impact of their scope of work. So that is something that we would look to each of you to define on your own terms, and something that we would be looking at as we evaluate proposals.
And you could include learning and evaluation as a part of your grant.
Correct.
In your budget.
Thank you. Yeah. So if you wanted to set aside resources specifically in your grant budget for either to fund evaluation on a contract basis or by somebody on staff, that is certainly an allowable expense. Great. Well, again, want to thank everybody for joining us. Apologize again for the audio challenges earlier in this call. We will be posting this webinar, which I've been assured the audio on what we post will be superior to what many of you heard earlier at the beginning of the webinar. We will also be updating our FAQs on a regular basis to reflect not only what we received during this webinar, but also what comes in over the next few days. We're very excited to learn, to see what comes in the door in terms of your ideas and your letters of inquiry. And thank you very much for taking an hour out of your day to join us.